Global orders don't collapse overnight, but sometimes all it takes is one defiant act to expose the cracks. Mexico's refusal to sign a key U.S. trade deal may seem like a diplomatic squabble, but look deeper. What we're witnessing is the beginning of a rebellion against decades of Western economic dominance, a rebellion backed by BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and now, potentially, Mexico. The implications are seismic. For the first time, America's grip on Latin America is visibly slipping, and the country it underestimated for so long, its southern neighbor, is now being courted by its greatest rivals. This isn't just about Mexico. It's about a tectonic shift toward a multipolar world, and it's already happening faster than anyone expected. Because when alliances shift, economies follow, and when economies shift, power follows. The global order did not crack on a battlefield. It cracked at a press conference. When President Claudia Sheinbaum took the podium and flatly rejected the Trump administration's trade proposal, she didn't just make policy, she made history. Her words were calm, calculated, and cutting. Our economic sovereignty is not for sale. And with that, she drew a red line no Mexican leader in recent memory had dared to draw. What exactly did she reject? A deal that wasn't really a deal, more like an ultimatum. A near 50% tax on Mexican exports, combining a newly proposed 30% tariff with an existing 15% levy. For context, this would have devastated Mexico's most vital industries: agriculture, auto manufacturing, electronics, crippling supply chains on both sides of the border. And that's the twist. This wasn't just bad for Mexico, it was disastrous for the U.S. too. Tomatoes, avocados, auto parts, medical devices, things Americans use daily would see price spikes overnight. But for President Trump, the goal wasn't mutual prosperity. It was political theater. Blame Mexico for everything from border instability to inflation, and use economic pressure to force compliance. But it backfired. Instead of caving, Mexico stood up, and BRICS noticed. Within hours of Mexico's rejection, high-level envoys from China and Russia issued statements of support. Brazil, India, and South Africa followed. And just like that, the narrative shifted. Mexico wasn't isolated. It was invited. BRICS, once seen as a loose economic forum, has become a magnet for nations disillusioned with Western hegemony. And Mexico, Latin America's second-largest economy, would be the biggest prize yet. Why does this matter? Because BRICS isn't just symbolic anymore. It includes Saudi Arabia, Iran, Egypt, powerhouses with oil tech and growing military clout. Adding Mexico would redraw global economic maps, and more importantly, it would send a message: the era of unipolar U.S. dominance in the Americas is ending. Back in Washington, the response was confusion. Officials scrambled to spin the rejection. Media outlets downplayed it. But they couldn't hide the bigger picture. America's southern neighbor had just challenged the post-NAFTA, post-Monroe Doctrine world and might actually win. This wasn't an accident. It was strategic. Mexico had grown tired of being the junior partner, of being blamed, taxed, and pressured. And when BRICS extended an open hand, Mexico didn't hesitate to consider it. A rebellion had begun. Not with guns or protests, but with a press release. And it hit harder than anyone in Washington expected. For over a century, the United States operated under a simple belief: Latin America was its backyard. Protected by the Monroe Doctrine, and reinforced by endless economic deals, military support, and soft diplomacy, Washington assumed unchallenged influence over its neighbors. But something has changed. Mexico's bold rejection of Trump's trade deal was not an isolated act of defiance. It was the first domino in a chain reaction that's now reshaping Latin America's political landscape. Just days after Mexico's decision, both Colombia and Cuba signaled openness to aligning with BRICS, a move unthinkable even a year ago. Cuba's motivation is understandable. For over 60 years, it has faced a relentless U.S. embargo that stifled its economy and isolated it diplomatically. Now, for the first time, it's being welcomed into a club of global players, BRICS, who value what Cuba offers: expertise in biotechnology, food security, and resilience. Colombia's pivot, however, is even more startling. Traditionally one of Washington's closest allies in the region, Colombia's new progressive leadership has begun questioning its automatic alignment with U.S. foreign policy. In speeches and at diplomatic forums, Colombian officials are now calling for a multipolar vision for Latin America, one that prioritizes regional integration and strategic autonomy. Together, these three nations, Mexico, Colombia, Cuba, form a potential new axis of influence. Not subservient to Washington, not isolated rogue states, but regional powers seeking independence through cooperation. The Rio BRICS summit made it official. For the first time, Latin American nations were granted formal observer status at a major BRICS gathering. The symbolism was undeniable. The gates of elite global negotiations, once reserved for G7 members and Western-aligned allies, are now opening to the global South. Washington has no easy answer. The old tools, tariffs, sanctions, diplomatic pressure are losing their potency. Worse, they may be pushing longtime allies into the arms of geopolitical rivals. For example, leaked memos from think tanks in Texas and Arizona warn that economic aggression toward Mexico is dangerously short-sighted. Even Republican governors have begun voicing concerns. Border states rely heavily on trade with Mexico, and rising tensions are hurting their farmers, retailers, and logistics hubs. In private, some GOP strategists fear that alienating Latin America could cost them politically and economically for decades. What's happening isn't just a trade dispute. It's the collapse of a system where the U.S. dictated terms and expected loyalty. But as emerging economies grow stronger and global alliances diversify, that system is eroding fast, and what replaces it may look very different. When the Trump administration announced a new 17.09% tariff on fresh Mexican tomatoes, it was meant to be a show of strength, a punishment for defiance. But instead, it became the most ironic symbol of economic self-sabotage in recent memory. Here's why tomatoes are not just a cultural staple. They're a $2 billion trade item deeply embedded in American food supply chains. From fast food to grocery stores, Mexican tomatoes are everywhere. Slapping a nearly 50% tax on them overnight doesn't just hurt Mexico, it hurts the very people Trump claims to protect: American consumers and farmers. Supermarket chains quickly raised alarms. Prices surged, supply chains faltered, and importers scrambled. A distributor in Arizona put it bluntly, "You can't just replace Mexico overnight. It doesn't work that way." And he's right. The scale and speed of Mexico's agricultural exports are unmatched in the Western Hemisphere. No other nation can step in fast enough to stabilize the market. The result? Rising costs for American families, shrinking margins for U.S. businesses, and a wave of discontent spreading across border states. Ironically, many of these same states voted for Trump in 2020. Now, they're facing the consequences of policies that treat trade as warfare rather than partnership. And the frustration is growing. Leaked memos from state-level economic boards in Texas and New Mexico warn of lasting damage to local economies if tensions with Mexico escalate further. But it's not just about tomatoes. The tariffs extend to auto parts, electronics, and industrial materials, all crucial to American manufacturing. Industry leaders are worried. Investors are nervous. And for the first time in years, Wall Street is starting to hedge against long-term disruption with Mexico. Even within Washington, dissent is bubbling. Some members of Congress are quietly questioning whether the tariff strategy is sustainable or simply reckless. A report from a conservative think tank called it the most short-sighted foreign policy blunder of the decade. What makes it worse is that this economic backlash didn't need to happen. Mexico wasn't trying to provoke the U.S. It was trying to preserve dignity, stability, and economic fairness. But when pushed into a corner, it responded not with capitulation, but with strategy. And now, as the consequences ripple through American farms and supermarkets, one fact becomes clear. The real losers in this economic standoff may not be in Mexico City, but in places like Ohio, Arizona, and Georgia. What happened on the surface was explosive. Mexico said no, BRICS said welcome, and the U.S. fumbled to respond. But what's unfolding behind the scenes is even more telling and far more dangerous for Washington. Almost immediately after Mexico's rejection of Trump's trade proposal, diplomats from China and Russia sprang into action. Their message, "We support Mexico's dignity." But their real intent went deeper: partnership offers in infrastructure, energy, cybersecurity, and telecommunications. This wasn't a spontaneous gesture, it was strategic positioning. Chinese and Russian firms have already started drafting investment blueprints for Mexican rail lines, energy grids, and 5G networks. They're not just observing, they're building. With open arms from Mexico's ministries. And it's not just Beijing and Moscow. India is pushing for pharmaceutical collaborations. Brazil is opening agricultural trade talks. South Africa is offering AI development exchanges. BRICS has transformed into an economic alliance with teeth, and Mexico may be the newest nerve center in its Western expansion. Why now? Because Washington left a vacuum, and geopolitics abhors a vacuum. The Trump administration's approach, tariffs, threats, and transactional diplomacy created an opening for rivals. By treating neighbors like bargaining chips instead of partners, the U.S. pushed them to consider alternatives. And those alternatives are now becoming real. Internal sources from Mexico's National Security Council reportedly concluded that the U.S. proposal was not just economically aggressive, it was geopolitically reckless. It opened the door for deeper foreign influence on their own terms. But here's the twist: this shift isn't driven by ideology. It's driven by necessity. Mexico isn't choosing China or Russia out of loyalty. It's choosing resilience. A future where it's no longer held hostage by unpredictable U.S. politics. A future where it can diversify partnerships, build independent infrastructure, and have a seat at multiple tables, not just Washington's. For the U.S., that's the true threat. Not that Mexico is becoming anti-American, but that it no longer needs America as much as it used to. And that idea, the loss of leverage, the erosion of economic control, is what's keeping policymakers in D.C. awake at night. The shift has already begun, and the next chapter won't be written in dollars. It might be written in yuan rupees and pesos. For decades, the global economy revolved around a single center of gravity, the United States. Its currency, its corporations, its trade deals, all formed the bedrock of international finance. But now we're witnessing something once thought impossible, a new world forming with multiple centers, and Mexico may be its latest architect. This is the essence of the multipolar moment. BRICS was never meant to be a club of economic outliers. It was built as a counterbalance, a way for emerging powers to coordinate and challenge Western dominance. But as it expanded to include Saudi Arabia, Iran, Egypt, and now potentially Mexico, it has grown into a gravitational force of its own. And the numbers don't lie. If Mexico officially joins BRICS, the bloc's combined GDP measured by purchasing power parity will exceed that of the G7. Its population will represent over 45% of the world. Its energy reserves, trade routes, and tech collaborations would reshape everything from how energy is priced to how data is transmitted. In short, this isn't about ideology, it's about math and momentum. What Mexico represents is a tipping point the moment a major Western-leaning economy says we're exploring other options. That message resonates not just in Latin America, but globally, Argentina, Chile, Indonesia, even Thailand are reportedly watching closely. If Mexico, a cornerstone of NAFTA, can chart an independent course, so can they. And that terrifies the West. Because what used to be fringe trading outside of the dollar bypassing SWIFT using local currencies is becoming normalized. China and Russia are already doing it. India is expanding it. Brazil is encouraging it. Now imagine Mexico joining that chorus and what it means for the dollar's supremacy. The implications stretch beyond finance. Culturally, it signals a rejection of Western double standards, free trade for some, sanctions for others. Politically, it reflects fatigue with U.S. inconsistency, cooperation one year, coercion the next. Economically, it's about survival in a volatile world. And ideologically, it's about dignity. By choosing to explore BRICS, Mexico isn't turning away from the U.S. out of hostility. It's turning toward a future where its voice matters more, where decisions aren't made in Washington and handed down like commandments, but negotiated in broader, fairer forums. This is the new reality, a global order no longer dictated by one, but negotiated by many. And if Washington doesn't adapt, it may soon find itself not at the center but on the sidelines. The world didn't change overnight. But one decision, one word ignited the spark, no. Mexico's refusal to accept an imbalanced trade deal didn't just protect its economy. It rewrote its role in the global story. It exposed a weakness in Washington's strategy. It signaled that the rules of the game were no longer fixed. They're being rewritten in real time. This is not just a trade dispute. It's a tectonic shift. One where allies are reevaluating their loyalties. One where BRICS, once a side note, is becoming a central chapter. And one where countries that were once pressured into silence are now speaking with confidence and clarity. For the United States, the challenge isn't just external, it's existential. What happens when your neighbors stop depending on you? What happens when your partners no longer fear your pressure? What happens when your threats no longer work? The answer is unfolding now. And while Washington may still have power, it's losing something even more critical relevance: influence, trust. This is not the end of the United States, but it might be the end of the era where its dominance went unquestioned. The rise of BRICS, the assertion of Mexico, and the potential realignment of Latin America mark a turning point, not just in economics but in the psychology of global diplomacy. It tells the world you can say no. So the question now isn't what Washington will do next, it's what you believe. Do you think this is the beginning of a more balanced, cooperative global system, or the start of a chaotic era of fragmentation and decline? Leave your thoughts in the comments. And if this message resonated, if you believe the world is changing and you want to understand it before it passes you by, subscribe now. Because this isn't just politics. This is history in motion.